welcome back to this. The sort of culmination of this part 1 area with the talking about the battle in the storms that occur with Rawnae. And now, to avoid spoilers of the future lore writing, I'm not actually going to go into detail on what it was that Rawnae was planning, but what I will say is that Becca Quinn's painting of it indicated large creatures bringing together a destructive wave and thrashing ships apart in the sea, and all of these horrendous images. So, little bit of an insight there. But at the culmination of all of this, mentioning on the Sea Elf video, we talked about the factor that Arios and Mayana, with their forces, engaged Rawnae and his followers, but when it came to the actual battle itself, they were getting overpowered. And this battle itself has a lot of different factors. The human forces of Destino and Idros are too far away, but the Sea Elves go in, the Ogres of Hedotelic go in, some Ogres of Sarakarth also aid them, who they're able to convince, and a few other forces also intervene as well as some rare ones that are incredibly peculiar sights, like Onokrith ships show up, wyverns from the Labyrinth of Beasts, the Sparrowhawks from the Shrouded Eye all the way up here, they all turn up, and as well as Dracons from the sister Isle realms, which I keep calling the sister realm isles. But they all move in and engage Rawnae's forces in this open, vast sea, and the battle is chaotic with all the magical focus, and it is also noted that in this battle Rawnae has a lot of imprisoned enchanters and sages and things from the Kirin Dracons, or Kirin Drakan Dracons rather, but they fully engage, they fight, and things end up going awry for Rawnae, but he keeps pushing forward. He's trying to complete this incantation with what it was going to summon forth, and at the sort of final decisive moment, a final force enters the fray, and it is the Last Prince and his forces that, through some strange machinations of the Indigo Fox once again, they are able to actually find their way onto the surface and fully engage the fleet with stone bending and everything, disrupting the waves, disrupting all of these different elements that completely cut apart his fleet. And the Last Prince moves on to actually engage Rawnae for a second time after Arios and Mayana had been completely just cast about by him. And the battle between these two very powerful figures, in fact, is absolutely destructive, and it ends up being pinned for quite some time, and the Last Prince suffers a couple of wounds, but he's able to deliver a more punishing wound onto Rawnae, one that he thinks could actually lead to a proper death blow. And as he prepares to deliver that, Malkish intervenes, recovering himself, and doesn't exactly do much. He attempts to fight the Last Prince, gets battered about a bit, but in the fighting, Rawnae actually gets knocked overboard. And with the torrents and the storms and everything, his body just gets swept away before anyone can necessarily do anything to rescue him. And a magical explosion occurs from the spell failing, and it pretty much throws everyone aside. in the aftermath, there's a lot of damage and everything. Few notable figures who I currently haven't decided are most likely slain in the effort. Arios and Mayonnaire, as I noted before, do survive, as does the Lost Prince. I would also say most likely that Narazil probably is slain in that, the Harbinger. But Malkish does make it. He ends up surviving as well. And for quite a long time, this is what many people thought was Rawnae's grave. But in secret, he had actually managed to get ashore on Arisen. And he found refuge. But there's a key issue with the refuge. Or not the refuge, but with him himself. Is that the wound that the Lost Prince had delivered him, it was actually a wound not intended on actually killing him, but bringing him close enough that the magic imbued to him as a Kunroke would fail and he would be able to be turned into a servant of the Lost Prince as a way of vengeful torment. And this wound is something that he has to dedicate a lot of his own magic to consistently fight off. But upon his hiding, and he conceals himself within the northern reaches of Arisen, so he covers up into this area, which is the ruin of the old Kirindrek realm of Kenarith. He hides in the slopes near Narkurlin. He covers a lot of different land and everything, hiding and concealing himself as much as he can. And whilst he is present there, he starts to learn of the presence of the Ice Elves, and it doesn't actually take him long to realise what they were, being Dark Elves who had been corrupted and turned to Senetvia's will. And he keeps witnessing them, and then we move on to what happens next with their own actions and elements, and this will give hints to Rawnae's initial plan as well, because it plays into what the Ice Elves, it's one of these sort of things where they were the original watchers of Rawnae, but now Rawnae is watching them learn and twist his initial plan to their own agenda. And if I just quickly change the title around, because there is another element to this. So we've done the Battle in the Storms, so we will take that away and throw in Aphalas Shadow Dance. And this is a prolonged series of events, but to put it into perspective, this is, or at least the second group to do this, is actually what the first ever Aphalas D&D campaign was about, and the group that they were following. I'm just casually looking at the screen to see if Pebble picks up on that. He has. Yes, it is. And the Ice Elves end up planning to do essentially what Rawnae was doing, which is take a lot of magical beings and individuals, but use their power to fulfill their own, to be able to do something significant. And that significant element is a raid No, it's not actually a raid, because during the Battle of the Storms, it was learnt prior to that, and this is one of the urgency that sent the Dracons of the Sister Realm I was in. Rawnae had sent forces to the Arach-Nihilith archipelago, which within the Targ's Bastion held something arguably in some cases even more significant to when it imprisoned Senetvia, and that was the Amethyst Crown, one of the original weapons, the things designed to kill the creators. But this one, it was different, like the Staff of Shah. It held some different avenues and elements. But in that raid, Rawnae gathered two key things. His agents were able to take the crown, but they also were able to slay one of Natog's people and take the Scorpion blood. The last time that the Scorpion blood was used and transfixed into other creatures like the demonic ones created the Scorpio Korith. The Scorpio Korith being demonic creatures based off the Korith Adar that were so destructive and powerful that they got physically hunted down by most of the protector races. And raid and everything, basically the blood was not actually known that was taken, but the crown ends up falling into the depths as well. But upon watching the Ice Elves, Rawnae learns that they have possession of it now, as well as something else. And that's what's going to move us on. But it is the Sparrow Helm. The Sparrow Helm being quite a little unique item in all of Aphalas' lore, to be honest. Once held by Sparrow Arios, who was a Tarasil human. The Sparrow Helm is significant because everyone thought it was destroyed. After the chaos that happened with Arios' own story, betrayal and all the rest of it, there was a battle that happened within the steppes, and at the end of the battle, a pyre was built, and at the top of the pyre was the Sparrow Helm itself, and everyone left it to its fate of simply just being burnt and destroyed. But not only have the Ice Elves recovered it, but it also looks like using the emerald magic of one of their own, they've been able to completely repair it. Though it still maintains a bit of a twisted, burnt state to it. But with their magic and manipulation has added some other elements to it, like their corruptive aspect as well. But during the Shadow Dance, the D&D, various aspects happen. There's characters from all over that occur. And to be honest, I'm going to bring those ones up in the edit. I'm not going to walk around and do this now, but those characters are Rawnae, a hedotelic ogre who became a warrior enchanter. You've got the Kirindrek Cersei. You have the human of Rovlaror, Rawnae, and then the human of Tarasil, who became a temple guard of Jonasin. You've got an Ijati, who went through a name change, and I need to check what the name change was. You've got two forest dwarfs of Smugon and Londor Elfkin. You have the wood elf Fori. You have the exiled troll of Olacron. You have the Onokrith goblin of Guzier. and you have the Northern Haraketh Goblin of Vikalau, alongside the Steppe Ogre of Sorvrin and the Dracon of Genesir. And together, this group became a fairly formidable force, and they went through various efforts, completing a lot of different tasks through the steppe, helping to thwart an effort that was focused around Twarlex and Carbalez. Twarlex, the wyvern that is, whose bloodline ruled Carbalez. And then they did something a bit Pebble, you were playing a dwarf. But Narkurlin, this Haven province, they end up actually taking it over. And they use it as their new base of operations. Something that's a tad little controversial in their efforts and things, but they end up holding it, and it does actually aid them, a sort of necessary evil in some cases, in preventing the Ice Elf efforts. The efforts of the Ice Elves were to use captured magical beings of the Kirindrek primarily, and to bolster their own power, but to bolster it in a way that allowed them to tap into the Amethyst Crown, which would normally not allow corruptive magic near it, to actually corrupt one of the most powerful creatures in all of Aphalas, which is Nisithir, the Dragon of Darkness. And they wanted to corrupt him to the point of using him to effectively completely decimate all of, well, pretty much all of Arisen, although their primary target was actually the Kirindrek as their primary adversary. But it's this whole effort and just the sheer severity of this Ice Elf plot and plan, and the fact that it very nearly does happen, which leads to, and would have happened if it wasn't for the sacrifice of Sapphire and Garnet-Eyed, but another Kirindrek enchanter. But with all of this going on, Rawnae continued watching, almost called him Ferrinae, which was the wrong person. But in the battle and the struggles, the Ice Elf, the heads of the Ice Elves are actually weakened. There's a couple who are slain. But Rawnae actually takes the opportunity during these great battles that happen pretty much in the citadel of the Steathquin. But he travels to the opposite settlement of Senevia's Fang, able to infiltrate it with his agents, as Malkish had joined up with him, as well as any remaining loyalists. And he steals the Sparrow Helm, as well as kidnapping one of the Ice Elves. And that Ice Elf was my mouth, Tharacron. And it's after a lengthy battle, but Tharacron does end up being kidnapped by Rawnae, though he is not able to actually gather a hold of the Amethyst Crown, as well as that is retrieved by the group and returned safely to the hands of the Kirindrek, who take it back to the Arak Nihilith, for the time being at least. Oh my god, what am I doing? Sorry, the mouse is being a bit weird. But with all of this leads to one of the more significant elements of Arisen, and that is the formation of the Agate Barrier, the giant magical barrier that cuts off this land from the rest, understanding that with the Kirindrek pretty much solely making this decision without discussing it with anyone else, knowing that the Ice Elves, even weakened, are just too dangerous if they're able to have that kind of reach, because their forces not only consisted of people in Arisen, but they rallied forces from Nacerez as well, and they were manipulating the efforts of the Wyverns. It was all sorts of methods. So now we have a situation where Rawnae is still alive. Practically no one knows he's still alive aside from his small circle. He's kidnapped one of the remaining Ice Elves and has gone back into hiding along what I believe I have titled as the Selenite Line, this selection of hills, although I'm not fully sure for certain, although it might actually be changed and he might actually be like here or something. It depends, it makes sense, partly because Sparrowhawks, and also there's a lot of reasons why that wouldn't necessarily work. But Rawnae begins to determine some different aspects and factors of all of this, and he understands that he still wants to complete his task, but he also knows about his wound, which he's still having to fight and battle with, and his hope is that he could utilize something to allow him to complete his task whilst freeing himself of this potential fate. And he ends up crafting, in the combination of the magics, he finds other bodies within the ice and he ends up freeing them, but he utilizes the corruptive magic in the same way that the Ice Elves themselves were actually corrupted beforehand. But these bodies are those of... were they demon? I believe they were demon. Yeah, they were. And demon bodies that had long since been buried from areas like attacking Kenarith or things to do with Nagrasak's flame tribe or elements like that. But using his own power and using the corruptive nature of the Ice Elf in combination, they're able, even with some of it, he is able to transcend them into a new form. And I'm gonna just completely put the card on the table here. I was stuck for so long on whether to include orcs in Aphalas or not. I haven't, but this is like the closest thing to them. They essentially become his own form of Adar Demon, but with their own name, which I have written down in a document somewhere. They become his servants and creatures of chaos, and the thing that sets them apart is that they actually, there's some rumour that they may have certain abilities relating to the ice and things, but at the same time they are demons of the same sort of stature and strength of the ogres and the trolls, so they're a bit, they're like the lesser cousin of the Korath Adar. But they're essentially like snowhawks in a way, but in the ice and everything. So ice hawks, yeah, they have got their own name, and I will clarify it in the edit when I can get my hands on the document again. But they become his force and his key focus on these elements, and there are different aspects, like he sends them straight into this area of Arisen around the Shrouded Eye. And normally when forces get sent into there, it's to attack the Faerun or to attack the Kirindric, but he doesn't do either. He specifically uses his force to target the eyes of the father, of any he can find, which are the Lynx, but primarily also the Sparrowhawks. So he's sending this force out specifically to hunt these ancients and Fawnrith. And the reason why is because of their magical blood, or the blood that they have with its somewhat mystical capabilities, and he wishes to utilise that to aid in his wound, and it does effectively, at least he believes it staves it off, but not for long, and he even prepares to actually raid the temples of the Marjay Forest against the Kirindrek. As what happened with the Ice Elves also heavily sort of weakened the Kirindrek, and not so much the Ajati, but the Ajati are more focused elsewhere as well, because they're split between Arasin and Shah, even more so now. But Rawnae ends up coming across an opportunity, and it was an opportunity that was completely unforeseen. The Dracon Khanseer. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail over what Khanseer is, because when I do eventually do videos on Tonreef's war, Khanseer is significant in that. But as a baseline, Khanseer ends up disappearing. Many think he had just been slain, but his body, his fairly weakened body, by some air of magic or some machination or something, it ends up actually washing up on Arasin. And Rawnae finds it, or his servants find him. And it's in here that Rawnae actually ends up spying a fantastic opportunity. Khanseer is a Dracon. Dracons are naturally imbued with a sort of resistance, not only to weather and everything, but also to magic, but they're also naturally more mystical than a lot of the other creatures, bar the Kirindrek. Rawnae conjures up this idea and plan that he could potentially transfer his own soul through a mixture of the magic with the corruptive, because he's still got this Ice Elf, and he was essentially using this Ice Elf as a power battery to corrupt these demons into his new form. And he's aware that this final effort and what he's planning would most likely actually be the end of that Ice Elf, but as far as he was standing, he's kind of used up his usefulness. And his plan is to transfer his essence into Khanseer's body, not only to give him a new rejuvenated form, but because of the magical resistance, it would be much more resistant, and if possible completely remove the wound from the Lost Prince and be able to suffice. And if Rawnae was able to learn how to do this, there's no reason why he wouldn't be able to do it again as well, thus giving him a form of very strange immortality. However, he is weakened from the wound, with what he thought having dealt with it, not properly dealt with it, and Khanseer also being weak. He knows that if he tries to do it directly, it will most likely be the end of both of them. So instead, with a mix of the blood of the scorpion, which he still has, he combines that with the magic and the Sparrow Helm as the instrument, as a way to transfer the essence without the direct transformation. So he passes his essence into... he binds his essence and soul essentially to the helmet. Very Dr. Fate. But in the midst of all of this, and there is some background context here, such as the actions of Trelvin and Maltos, the what happened on the archipelago and other elements such as the rumour that reaches the Temple Guard that the Sparrow Helm has returned or is found a new owner concerning the Temple Guard, because they were the ones who initially went and fought the original effort. So at this point, unbeknownst to Rawnae, there's actually two parties that have moved into his land. One of them is Maltos at the head of primarily a Dracon and Amethyst Protector group, with Genesia also present, and they're heading over. Trelvin is not present because in this story, Trelvin fairly early on actually moves to investigate not so much what was going on with all of this, but investigate what was going on basically below the earth, as the last prince at this point had been silent for a very long time, and wondering, so, okay, why are there sudden tremors and everything? Why are these random storms? Are they potentially responsible? Unfortunately for Trelvin, one of these random storms strike him when he's on his way to Idros, and his small collection of vessels get completely swallowed up by the storm, and he disappears. And this is actually in like the current point of where I'm at in the lore as well, so in terms of the writing. Which means that currently Darenthal, the Dracon Kingdom, is without a leader in the world building and the lore. So during the efforts of the Shadow Piece, which are going to be some interesting consequences. But you have this one force of the Dracons moving together, and then you have this other force which is a whole lot more mixed up. You have Temple Guard of Galeria, but on the Isle of Tartak they come across Guzier, Sovereign and Smokorn, as well as the Ajati companion, who I need to remember the name of, at the head of their own little mercenary group. And together, after having a bit of a brawl with local Talamarith people, they end up travelling to Arisen. And within Arisen, they do attempt to gather some more support from Cersei, although with her own role now, a duty that she took over, and that will be another focus, she refuses, but they do end up getting support from Narkerlin, meaning that at this point you've got the Dracons on one side, and then you've got this combined force of human and steppe forces the Temple Guard and the steppe forces moving to wherever I determine Rawnae's base to be. And yeah, things end up being interesting. His force ends up challenging Londor Elfkin, who has become the new warden of Narkerlin, and his forces, who are the first to intercede and attack, buying enough time for their support to get there. But Rawnae basically has the worst luck when it comes to incantation and spells, because this is the second spell that gets interrupted halfway through. He attempts to start this transition into Khanzir, but in the middle of it he gets attacked and engaged, and the helmet this time does get properly destroyed by the actions of Cersei, with a mixture of her Agate magic and Emerald magic. She uses an enhanced form of the Brittle Forge spell and completely shatters the helmet, leaving it abandoned and leaving other errors. But the problem with it is that in a reaction to knowing what happened last time with the explosion, fearing that it may actually be his end, Rawnae quickly reacts and tries to push away the explosion, and there are multiple shards of the helmet that go awry. These shards that are now been bound with elements of a soul and also magic of various kinds. 2 Temple Guard get struck, a Kirindrek gets struck, and there was another who gets struck as well. But then the final person who gets struck and keeps it all quiet is Maltos, the Dracon. Maltos is another Dracon who's tied to the Tonroof War and everything, but he was the big figure, and there were visions that were sending him to try and locate Khansir, thinking his old king was still alive. But now he's been hit by this wound as well. And the shattering occurs, and Rawnae's force gets pretty much completely not completely decimated, but there's a long drawn out fight and most of them get destroyed, with the majority of those surviving actually fleeing, not with their master. They flee into the IC of Arasin. So the IC of Arasin, as the lore stands, is now currently populated by a load of basically ice orc demon creatures, and the Rawnae escapes, and Malkish actually escapes with him, Malkish being a sort of loyal servant to him, and Khansir's body gets recovered. And I'm going to keep the title on this because I need to, well, actually, there is a brief segment now. There's a couple of other segments that will be covered afterwards, but this is going to be the longer one out of all of these. It's quickly discovered by Rawnae that he does not feel completely whole. And what has effectively happened, although only he realises it at this point, is that his soul is now split between his own body, small segments in the shards, and Khansir's body. And effectively Rawnae prepares to try and make more measures. He attempts to continue going, but he also feels that he's going to start becoming subservient to the wound, which is still present. And he knows he can't go on without succumbing to it. But he is never actually given the chance. I brought up 2 characters earlier when I talked about the Shadow Dance, Olacron and Fori. Olacron is an exiled troll from Talonser because he became obsessed with obsidian magic. Fori has her own history as well, but after what happened with the Shadow Dance, they ended up going off together, and Olacron ended up helping Fori basically mend her past. Not in, and just to clarify, not in time travel or things like that, but basically make up for it. But Olacron's obsession with the obsidian magic allows him to recognize when a soul is, when something's wrong with a soul. And he ends up finding Rawnae after they actually hunted down and slew Malkish. And he ends up completely delivering the end to that half of Rawnae. Not And it's not so much to free the soul necessarily, although he does become sort of entranced by that, but it's more just as an act of punishment, knowing that their old friends had been the ones ending up caught in his actions and chaos. But he immediately picks up on the fact that that soul is not full. And it quickly becomes understood where the other half of the soul is, and it's within Khan's ear. But at this point, that is effectively Rawnae's story done. There is the other half of the soul, and there's what happens to the other characters, including Maltos, and those will be other factors. But to effectively break it down on what happens with the characters of the Shadow Dance afterwards, after the D&D, is that 4 of them, the ones I listed earlier, Smookorn, Gouzier, Sovereign, and the Ijati, form a mercenary group which ends up on the Isle of Tartak, and all of these elements, they end up going elsewhere and stuff. Londor and Rawnae end up being the Wardens of Narkerlin, although Rawnae is unaccounted for on what happens to him. There are 2 characters from the D&D who are, at this point, deceased because of nothing more than age, really, and that is Vikalau, the Goblin, and Jonasin, the Temple Guard human. So they're out of the equation completely. Rawnae is completely unaccounted for so far in the lore after this. Ganessa returns to what she was doing with the Sister Realm Isles and her previous talent and past. Olacron and Fori went off on their own, and Cersei ended up fulfilling a promise to Sapphire Garnet-Eyed in taking over her leadership of the Emerald Path, a nomadic set of forces that were led by Akiran Dreg to basically keep peace in southern Arasin steppe. Or the southern steppe of Arasin, rather. So that is all that happens on that front. And to be perfectly honest, I think that's where I'm going to leave this for now, as I don't want to, as this was primarily focused around Rawnae and everything, but I will actually just go on to what happens to another figure as the last segment, and then to wrap up we'll do something a bit different, primarily because I can feel my voice starting to strain a little bit, and I've got a call later as well, so so please do comment, like, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed. Please do check out the links in the description and all the rest of it. Welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Fellowmind books.